Are you ready to transform your business trips into tax-deductible adventures? Let me guess, you've got a bunch of trips planned for your business this year, and you're wondering what you can write off and what the simplest process to do that is. Well, that is what we're going to be talking about today in this video. Plus, if you stay until the end, I'm going to be sharing a bonus tip with you all about how to turn your other vacations into tax deductions. Yes, I mean your business paying for your vacation. So definitely stick around because it gets a little juicy. If you're new to this channel, hi. I'm Jamie Trull, and I'm going on vacation tomorrow, which is why I look like this. And it's also why it's a great time for me to be talking about business travel deductions and how to make the most of them. Okay, that's better. Now, first of all, a quick disclaimer, I am a CPA, but I'm not your CPA. So make sure to double check anything with your CPA about your specific situation. Now, first off, what expenses can you deduct for business? What are those deductible travel expenses that you can write off? And the first question to ask yourself is, what is the primary purpose of the trip? Okay, because the answer will be different for those. But the most flexible and where you're going to get the most write-offs is if the primary purpose is for business. And primary purpose is generally when more than 50% of the trip, you will be working on business. So if you're going on a trip for say 5 days and 3 of those days you will be working actively, then that would probably be considered a business trip. Now, if you're wondering how much you have to work each of those days, there's not a specific number, but typically it's understood to be, 4 hours or more in a day would count as a day that is primarily for work. And in that case, your travel days count as well. Okay, so your travel days are going to be deductible if you meet that primary purpose being business. So you can see how you can structure this trip in a way to make more things deductible. Because if the primary purpose is business, you can write off the travel to get there, right? That could be your flights or all of your mileage to get to where you're going. You can write off your lodging for the entire time, even if you're spending a third of the time, let's say, or even almost half of the time on personal things. You can deduct all of that lodging. And that also means that you're going to be able to deduct transportation for your whole trip, meaning taking Ubers around or whatever you are doing. And you can deduct your meals, but remember, meals are always only 50% deductible. So if you can deduct them, that's only going to be half the deduction is what you will get. But you can see that if business is the primary purpose of the trip, then you will be able to deduct more of your expenses in that case. And really, documentation is going to be critical here around when you worked, how much you worked, what days you worked, so that you can substantiate that the primary purpose of the trip was truly business if you were ever audited by the IRS. Now, if the primary purpose of the trip isn't business, but you're doing some business while you're there, then you may not be able to deduct your travel to and from, but you still can potentially deduct the expenses that relate to business. So if you worked a day, right? Like maybe you worked 4+ hours in one day on vacation, then ultimately that day and that night's lodging probably would be a deductible business expense if you document it well. So that's just something to be aware of, is that the way that you document this and the way that you set up your trip can really matter. Now, the way you structure it matters, and I'm going to be talking a little bit more about some tricks around how you can structure it well such that you can maximize your deductions at the end of this video, so stick around. But first, let's talk about what you can't deduct. What are not considered deductible travel expenses. And one of those things is typically going to be the cost of travel for your family. So if your spouse is coming with you, if your kids are coming with you, in most cases, that's probably not going to be deductible, even in the scenario that you are there primarily on business, okay? So unless there is a specific business reason they are also there, it's gonna be hard to really be able to support deducting their costs as well. So your meal might be deductible, again, at 50%, but theirs wouldn't. And your airfare might be fully deductible, but theirs probably is not. And that is one of those areas that the IRS would want to see and understand. Now, if your spouse actually works for you and has an active role in the business and is an employee or an owner, then you may be able to justify, again, if it's well documented, why that should also be a travel write-off for you. Now, the other thing that's not going to be deductible is entertainment expenses. So if you're going somewhere and even if you're entertaining a client, just like it would be when you're home doing that, it's still not deductible. Entertainment expenses is something that they took away a few years ago, the deduction for that, because some people were overusing it. Not surprised. So if you go to a concert or a Broadway show, right, that's not going to be a deductible expense, even if the trip is primarily for business. Now, the personal portion of your trip won't be deductible, again, even if you're there primarily on business. And I'm not talking about lodging. What I'm talking about there is if you go sightseeing and you have costs related to that, right? Those are not going to be deductible because those were done for personal reasons. So even in the event that you're there for primarily business purposes, that doesn't mean every single dollar you spend is going to be deductible. And the other thing that's not going to be deductible and would be disallowed under audit more than likely are lavish expenses. Now, it's a little subjective. What's considered a lavish expense? Again, the IRS really is expecting you to have reasonable expenses. So make sure not to get a little too cute there and start having lavish expenses that you are deducting for your business, because the IRS is pretty wise to that. Now, really quickly, an important caveat to all of this is the fact that international travel is treated a little bit differently. Similar rules, but slightly different as far as how much time needs to be spent on business in order to deduct things like airfare. So you're going to want to pay attention to what those specific IRS rules are if you're planning to do international travel. And it can vary depending on if you're gone for a week or less or more than a week. The rules can be a little bit different with international travel. So I'm not going to get into all of that here, but just know that that is something that can change the answers to these questions a little bit. So I'm going to give you an example of a trip that my husband and I are taking to New York pretty soon. And as I have been planning this, I have made sure to keep the rules in mind. So yes, we've been wanting to go to New York, but typically I do like to wait until there's a true business reason for me to go, because I want to deduct those expenses as much as I can. So in this case, I'm going to New York. We're going to be staying just a couple of nights, and we are going up there, and I'm going to be meeting with my agent, my literary agent, because I'm writing a book. More to come on that later. And also with my editor at the publishing company. And so that is what we're building our trip around. So we're going up there. My husband is coming with, but I'm going to be able to deduct my full airfare there and back, because I'm going to make sure to adhere to these rules around how much I need to be working on what days, right? And I'm also going to be able to deduct the full amount of our hotel cost, because I would have that whether he was with me or not. And I'm going to be able to deduct all of my meals. Again, they're only 50% deductible, but still it's better than nothing. Now, I won't be able to deduct his airfare, unfortunately, and I also won't be able to deduct any of our entertainment costs or his meal costs. So I'm going to have to be a little bit paying attention to all of that and documenting it well, but I want to make sure that I don't miss out on anything and that I'm maximizing the deductions that I can get, because for me, the main purpose of that trip is going to be built around business. And I still get to do some fun things. We're still going to be going to some Broadway shows and having a lot of fun, but I can do that and deduct pretty much the vast majority of my expenses for that trip. Now, if you're curious how you do these deductions, it is going to depend a bit on your entity type. So if you are an LLC who is not elected to be taxed as an S corporation, or you are a sole proprietor, those are going to be really easy deductions that you are going to do on the face of your Schedule C. So they're just going to be expenses for your business like anything else. If you are an S corporation owner like I am, or a C corporation, those are likely better treated as reimbursable expenses to yourself as an employee of the business. So I do recommend having a reimbursement plan just like you would for any other employees, right? What does the company reimburse as far as travel expenses go? And I actually do those reimbursements just like I would for any other employee. And when you're creating the policy for yourself and for other employees, it's good to know what the IRS allows so that you can align your policy to what's deductible under IRS rules. So a lot of these things we've talked about as far as you being able to deduct travel, this also applies to any employees that you have that are traveling, especially if they are traveling for business purposes. So I promised to tell you about one of my favorite IRS rules that you can use to deduct more of your travel, and that is the sandwich day rule. So the sandwich day rule basically says, look, if you have meetings maybe somewhere that isn't close to you on a Friday and on a Monday, you can stay over that full weekend, even if you're not working that weekend. If it's not practical for you to be able to come home, and if you're anywhere that you need to fly to, that's probably the case, right? That it's okay to stay and deduct all of those lodging costs, meal costs, etc., like you would if they were business work days. So I love when I am thinking about planning a trip, right? To think about, okay, how can I set up my meetings on a Friday and a Monday instead of a Thursday and a Friday, right? And so that way, if I wanted to stay the weekend, right, I can deduct all of those costs because it is not practical for me to be flying home and then flying back. It's actually going to end up costing more at the end of the day, probably, than just staying there. So that's one way to be able to help yourself be able to deduct more cost, is using that sandwich day rule to your benefit. Again, it comes with careful planning that's going to help you be able to deduct more. Now, I know there are a lot of things to think about when it comes to planning out your travel, so talking to your CPA or accountant about how best to structure it can be a really helpful thing ahead of time. And one more bonus tip for you is this. If you're traveling with a spouse or with your family, and your expenses are going to be deductible, then I would pay for your expenses through your business, take those deductions, right? But perhaps use points, even if they are points from a business credit card, to be able to fly your family. That's exactly what I did for the trip my husband and I are taking to New York. I paid for mine so that I can use it as a business deduction, but his, I used my business credit card to buy his ticket, okay? And you want to do that because I don't want to use credit card points to buy my ticket because I lose the deduction that way. So for me, using those points for personal things is going to be a better usage of travel points. Now, if you want to learn more about how to travel for free this year, I just did a recent video that has all of the information about using credit card points to optimize your travel and travel for free. So definitely go check that video out next, and I'll see you next time.